is. Okay. Can you see me?
Yes.
There. Okay. So what I thought we would do, this is the first episode of the Lean Newsroom, our podcast, Google Hangout on Air. And so today, welcome. This is our first episode, and what we are doing is we're going to be discussing things about organizational change and the future of journalism. And so today we decided we would talk about the New York Times Innovation Report. Yes, it's been out for a little while, but we thought it would be interesting to dig into it a little bit more because there's a lot of lessons in there. And it also seems to tie in with stuff that Carrie and I have been talking about with our book. So, okay. So, Brown, what thoughts do you have on this book? Or
Um,
on
well,
the
my first thought is that I'm drinking a Wisconsin beer here, so cheers. I cracked
See,
that just
you're
for our first Google Hangout. I thought, I needed a toast.
see, Brown, you should have warned me because I'm drinking coffee. I know
Yeah.
it's
Well, girls, that's because you're responsible. Um, yeah. Well, I thought the innovation report. I was just trying to pull up my blog post about it. But I just thought that it was pretty interesting how much it reflects a lot of the things that we've seen in other newsrooms, especially in terms of the issues surrounding culture, and just how even at a place like the New York Times that has these tremendous resources, at least in comparison to a lot of the newsrooms we've studied, that they're still struggling with a lot of elements of this transformation. Because sometimes just having really smart people and really good intentions, isn't necessarily enough. There's all these barriers that you and I have kind of looked at that take some strategic thinking to kind of work on. That was kind of my biggest overall takeaway. What did you think about
no,
having?
I thought the same thing. It's the same issues we've been seeing all over the place. And the thing that hit me, and I love the New York Times, and I love their digital stuff. So I just want to say that as a disclaimer because I was surprised in reading the report. It seems like I don't want to use the word hubris, but it's the idea of our journalism is so good that it should just speak for itself. And I think that goes historical to how journalists have always thought, right? If we do our jobs well and we just tell good stories, then the audience will come because that's what it's always done. And that's not good enough. And this report kind of reflects that. And the one thing that stood out to me in this report, I'll show it to you. I think it was, where was that? There's this great graphic that they put in. I wish the graphics reproduced a little bit better. But here, where was it? I think it was page 21. Sorry. Um, it was, it showed this, they were talking about the strategies that some of their competitors, oh, there it is, I think. Yeah, this is it. Let me put this on the screen so you can see what I'm talking about. So, all right, share. Okay. Okay. So you see here they've got this thing. This model is really interesting. Our goal, this to me seems a lot like Napoli's model of engagement, right?
Yeah. Wow. It really does.
Yeah, it's basically saying, okay, we got to get their attention, we've got to pull them in, and we've got to make it a habit. And then once they're a habit, then they're going to become loyal. The thing that they've kind of flipped loyalty and behavior though, because Napoli would say if you're a subscriber, you've actually gone to some kind of action, you know. And then this middle one, the current newsroom approach, quality journalism. That's what the whole thing's about. And that just made me laugh because I thought, that's what it is. We're so focused on telling the stories and doing those kinds of things, and we forget that we all have to be our own sort of evangelists and salespeople for. And I hate to use the term salespeople, but that's basically what it is, wouldn't you say?
Mhm. Yeah. No. Definitely. That's a big piece of this for sure.
But
Yeah. That's what I mean. As I was reading this, that's funny. I didn't. That one, until you're pointing it out, wasn't standing out to me. But there were just so many things in there that reminded me of stuff that we've talked about and read about before. So I thought
Yeah.
that was pretty cool.
Yeah, as I was digging into it, it just seemed like these are things that we've seen all over the place. It reminded me a lot of the Monitor. I was thinking of what we've seen at the Monitor, but what the Monitor did, apart from other news organizations that we've looked at, because I think we saw that at other newspapers we've looked at, it's all about the front page. It's all about what we've always done. Yeah, you need to do blogs. Yeah, you need to do digital first, but that newspaper is always hanging over you. And in this
Mhm.
report, I noticed that they all talked about page one, right? It's all about
Right.
page one,
Yeah.
and you look at that chart that says, okay, we've got really, if you look at readership, our newspaper readership is the smallest part of our audience. The
Hmm.
digital audience is where the millions of people are, and that's where we need to be focusing, but we're not in the newsroom. We're still
Yeah.
stuck on that page one. And
Right.
the Monitor, until they said, you know what, we're just going to go to the weekly magazine, they weren't freed from that daily shackle.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think it was interesting too. I know that some of the New York Times folks that work more on the tech side were kind of saying on Twitter and other places that they thought that the report was a little bit too hard on the Times in some ways because, I mean, people like Derek Willis and our friend Brian Hammond, I mean, there is some incredible digital stuff going on at the New York Times. They have some really good project management best practices. In a lot of ways, they're leading the industry with their digital initiatives and some of the experimentation that they have done. And I think that's totally a fair response in some ways, but I mean, to me, I looked at it less of like that this report was an indictment of the Times specifically, but more as like, wow, even if you do have all this stuff figured out in some ways, you're still going to struggle with some of those things, like the print edition still having great primacy among your top leaders. I think it's just kind of important to sort of parse that out because I don't think I didn't really see it as like, oh, everything the New York Times does in digital is totally inadequate. I mean, I think the holistic picture is just that these are deeper psychological barriers to true transformation that no matter how advanced you are, you're still going to be dealing with them. There's still going to be a piece of what you have to kind of think about. So I don't know. I just thought that was maybe worth noting about all of this too.
I thought that's interesting, that the reaction of the tech people, because in my read of reading this as an outsider, is I almost feel like parts of it are not hard enough on the paper. That
Yeah.
there are just things about in the language that they use where I took some notes on this because I was just kind of surprised at the language they were using of I mean, and again, I acknowledge this because as a journalist, I love the New York Times and I hold them up as the gold standard, and I think we all do as journalists. But the public doesn't necessarily do that. I don't know that everyone in the
Yeah.
public does that. And there's
Right.
this sort of looking down their nose at some of the competitors like BuzzFeed and Huffington Post and some of that, where you see, using a phrase of this was the phrase where they referred to their upstart competitors who are succeeding, and the quote was, in spite of their content.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, maybe that's that we know what journalism is, and we're going to tell the audience what they need to consume
Mhm.
instead of respecting what the audience. Maybe there's some stuff out there that we wouldn't historically have considered journalism, right? The
Right.
celebrity news, the
Yeah.
the lists, and I think it was instructive that one of the top things for the New York Times in 2013 was that dialect quiz, right? So they
Yeah.
have the dialect quiz that's a huge hit. Is it news? Well, kind of. It's just a different way to. I think that's the thing, is that they focused on, when they applied disruptive innovation to BuzzFeed, they said that BuzzFeed's disruptive innovation was social media distribution. And
Mm-hmm.
and to my mind, their disruptive innovation was the ways they tell stories. I don't think it's the social media distribution is not an innovation really. I mean it is, but I don't know. I just see it as the stories are what are changing. The way we tell stories and communicate and get the audience to interact. That's the innovation that's disrupting what
Right.
journalists are doing.
Yeah, no, I mean, I definitely agree. I just think, there's just a tendency, I think, among all of us to maybe there's a little bit too much black and white going on, I mean, just in terms of like how we evaluate these things, because I mean, at the same time, I don't know if you saw those series of stories the Times did about healthcare costs and
Hmm.
people's experiences with the healthcare system, and they actually had like it was the most ingenious reader participation format I've ever seen where you could, like within the story, they had little boxes where you could leave sort of your comments with your experiences, and it fed back into like their reporting and the examples that they use like really seamlessly. I mean, to me, that was one of the more well-designed ways of like engaging your audience, getting your audience to actually participate in the journalism in a way that actually is meaningful beyond just, well, they liked it, or whatever. So I think it is interesting. So you see things like that popping up, um, at places like the Times, but then, you also see that very much driven by the print page one that's going on at the same time. So it's like all these different things are all sort of happening within the same organization. So I don't know. It's just kind of interesting to look at that, I guess.
Well, that was something I was going to ask you. Is do you think it's just a factor that they're too big? I mean, are they too big to move the ship around? I mean, when you've got
Yeah, I mean that may be part of it. Although in some ways, I mean, being too big also allows you, it gives you a little bit more freedom in some ways because you can have a certain number of staffers who you put on an innovative project and you're not pulling them away from, just even being able to produce any daily news report at all, which, at a lot of smaller papers today, they're so short staffed that they can't pull anybody off anything ever, basically, or very rarely. It's really difficult to do.
well,
Um,
and I was glad to see the report, acknowledge how creative and cool that Snowfall was, but really
mhm,
saying, you know what, we've got to get away from these huge,
mhm.
cool one-off things.
Right, yeah.
We've got to make it something that's ingrained in the process because ever since I saw Snowfall, yeah, I was wowed by what they did, and it did. I mean, it's incredible. But the moment I saw it, then I'm like, how do you do this week in, week out, every day? And is it? I don't know. I just think you have to come up with those things like coming up with quiz templates, like saying, okay, we did this really cool um, dialect quiz that everyone engaged with. How can we do this on a daily or weekly basis from a template, like the Monitor has done? The Monitor has made those quiz templates, and it's paid off for them. That's a huge driver of traffic for them. That they've been over to overcome that. But
Yeah. Yeah, no, and I was curious what you thought too about I mean, I thought one of the most frustrating things was just how little meaningful communications going on between, editorial and the business side, where there's sort of this wealth of information about how to engage audiences and, I mean, and just kind of allowing really old-fashioned barriers to get in the way of stuff that could actually make the journalism and the engagement better.
mhm.
I mean, that's something we've seen at other places as well, of course, but it's kind of depressing to continue to see that.
Well, and it was good to see the report acknowledge the importance of
Hmm.
of that. I wanted to highlight, there was a part of the report, there it is. Let me show you this. Is the what how we always look to these artifacts to see. I just thought it was kind of funny, and maybe I'm reading too much into it because you know me, but is looking at this graphic showing the divided company. It's really interesting. But look at how big the newsroom block is.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like all the other divisions are these little sort of a vertical box, and the newsroom is a giant square.
Yeah.
You know, I just thought that symbolism was kind of revealed something about the organization itself. But
Yeah, no, definitely.
uh,
But those guys, I mean, I've talked to some of those folks that work over in some of the some of the audience development or new initiatives, but they're actually based technically not in the newsroom. And man, they know a lot of smart stuff about your readers and what they want that, could really be interesting if it got fed back more meaningfully, to what the newsroom is doing, I think.
and that was something I thought was really important that the report highlighted too, is to say, how do we share these best practices in the
Mhm.
organization? I was going to show you another. Have you seen this Tumblr that the that NPR does?
Which one? I know they have a
It's the
couple.
social media desk Tumblr.
Oh yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I
I
mean, I
was
haven't read every post on it, but I've seen it.
I was going to show that for our 0 viewers.
Yeah. Woo!
Ooh, but
He's getting good at like look at him like this is like gross DJ, man. He's manipulating stuff.
well,
He's
I thought
throwing
that
stuff up on the screen.
I thought that's the benefit of this thing. I thought, okay, we could have some things and
No, you're right. I like it.
if I could call up let me do my new tab. Bunk. Okay, and then close these other things out. See, if I were really with it, I would have had all this stuff up already. Social
There we
media
go.
desk dot, what is it, tumblr.com, I think?
Yeah, it's something like that, I think.
No, that's not coming up. Yep, that's it. That's it. Cool. And I don't know. I just think, here we go. There we go. Yeah. So and what they do is it's a collaborative Tumblr.
I like
So
that idea.
yeah, so they can add stuff and they share it, and I love that they've crowdsourced it with the public. The public can see everything that they're talking about.
Yeah, I think that's really smart.
Yeah, I've been very impressed by when we were at ISOJ and I saw Melody Kramer. I was really impressed by a lot of the things she was talking about and the social media things they're trying at NPR. I think NPR is a useful comparison to the New York Times because it too is a storied, respected news organization that does things, the NPR way, and yet they're finding this way to transform and move into these different realms and trying things with different formats and different ways of telling stories that I think that are pretty interesting. Um, I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, no, definitely. And they also do, I mean, I think they just have a really great approach to experimentation and they use I mean, I don't know if it's formally design thinking, but they very much have particularly Brian Boyer and some of the
Oh yeah.
the programming data, other kinds of projects that they've come up with. It's just great. I mean, the process that they're using, I think, is really smart, really focusing on what the users actually want, before you actually start designing something, more of an agile development kind of approach. I think, and I love this. I mean, I love having, I think this is transparency, it's engagement, it's participation, because you're essentially telling your audience how and why you do what you do, but also, asking them to contribute. So I
Right.
think it's just a really smart thing to do.
Yeah, I think, and what I think is interesting is that that was one other thing that stood out to me in that innovation report was the lack um, of really the digital people getting the props or the credit that they deserve, and that instead of that they should be thought of as creative people rather than service people.
Hmm.
I think is really important, and I think um, that's what I think NPR does that really well. You know, one thing I just noticed, Brown,
What?
Look at this. I didn't know this when I was calling this up. Otherwise, I wouldn't. But look at
Jonathan
this.
Grove.
They put a link to my blog. Woo!
Cool.
That's pretty darn cool. I didn't realize that was even on there. So
Oh yeah, because of the Carnival of Journalism.
Carnival of
Oh,
Journalism.
cool.
Woo woo! I'll have to send a little thank you note on Twitter. That was pretty cool.
Well, that's really random
Look at
too.
that! I
You
even got
called
my
that
own
out and
tag.
here I am.
That-
That's
that's
awesome.
bizarre.
Wow, small world.
All right, sorry, but we digress.
Cool. I
What
think that's cool.
what I'm trying to think. Anything else from the report that you want to highlight before we end up this thing?
I mean, I think the only other thing that I thought was interesting was just, I'm really excited to see news organizations talk so much about building a culture of experimentation, although at this point it's probably going to become a buzzword like the word disruption. And
Right.
then everyone will decide that they hate it after all. But, I just think that based on a lot of what we learned, when we studied organizational change academically about the importance of constant learning, and what Ardress says about double loop learning and things like that, and how that really fits into startup culture, and how startups very much, they're constantly A/B testing, they're constantly looking for feedback every time they make an adjustment to their strategy or their product. I mean, I love that was very much a part of the report, and I'm really glad that newsrooms are embracing that kind of way of thinking, because I think that's really the only way to go going forward. And it's been like kind of a long time coming, and I'm finally seeing people kind of grasping that that's going to be a really important. Now it's easier said than actually done, which is where all that kind of culture piece comes in. But I'm still excited to see people really recognizing that that is incredibly important in the times that we're in now. So that
Yeah.
was my last big thing I thought was useful out of that.
Well, the thing that hit me, and I agree. I agree. I just think, to me, it's a really important document in terms of transformation of legacy media. Is that
Yeah.
I think the amount of reporting and information that is in there, and because they're in the New York Times, they can talk to Ezra Klein, and they can talk to BuzzFeed, and they can
Mhm.
talk to all these people and compile all this information in a very useful, compelling way
Mhm.
that's useful to anybody. I saw a blog post that I put up on my Twitter, a link to it on my Twitter, from a marketing blog that basically said there are real lessons in this innovation report for marketers. That
Mhm.
that it's not just journalists who should be reading this report. This is really an important document for anybody who's wanting to create content on the web. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
honestly,
That's true.
I think what we're seeing happening in the news industry, I think it's happening. Advertising, public relations are
Yeah.
freaking out just as much.
Yeah. Or they should be, and they're not yet.
Right, right. But
But yeah.
I
Exactly.
noticed you latched onto that thing that I put on my
Oh
Google
yeah.
post page. Yeah,
Mhm.
that article was really
Yeah, that's really
eye-opening.
interesting. I mean, my department is, I mean, as much as, in Memphis, we really struggled to kind of adapt our curriculum to the digital world. But, in a lot of ways, the news side actually was able to do that more. And our advertising and PR departments now are like, they're finally coming to grips with the idea that they really need to rethink, how they're doing things. And that these silos, like, advertising and PR and marketing used to be three totally separate things with their own skill sets. And I mean, there still are, obviously, I'm not an expert in that, but so many agencies now are looking for more of a merged approach, and then they're looking for skills that sort of overlap with news. I mean, that are,
Right.
storytelling and, almost like reporting. I mean, obviously they have different values and whatnot, but I mean, a lot of the skills are more like what the news kids are learning. So it's a very interesting, I just think it's interesting to watch that space start to go through some of the same things that we've been doing in the past few years. So
Well,
it's
and
interesting to watch.
we've been having that conversation in our department
Mhm.
at Drury. of saying, do we even need to think about merging our curriculum even more
Yeah.
so that the journalism kids are thinking more about marketing and promotion and thinking about audiences more, and the advertising and advertising and public relations students are thinking more about the content, given this push towards content marketing, which is fundamentally journalism. And it reminded me of that conversation we sat in on years ago with the Committee of Concerned Journalists, with Tom Rosenstiel bringing that up, of saying, maybe what we need to think about when CCJ was trying to figure out its mission for the future, one of the things he brought up at that time was saying, well, maybe we should look at, if you look at kind of what some corporate blogs are doing, they're fundamentally doing journalism. And
Yeah.
shouldn't we expect those same kinds of things, accuracy, transparency, verified content? Hey, I saw that.
I just took I'm gonna do something really meta. I was gonna try to take a picture of us and then post it on Instagram.
Oh, that's pretty awesome.
Very meta. Very meta. I thought it would be pretty good.
But
Yeah.
but I think that's where it's at, and I've just seen some really cool content marketing efforts that I think it has made me think about what I'm teaching in my classes, largely because the majority of our students are advertising and public relations majors. So
Yeah.
I always have to think about,
Right.
I'm split between them. So
Yeah, I mean, I used to be more of a purist about that, but I mean, I really have. That's one thing I've really kind of changed my mind about, because I just think that, I just think that realistically, fewer and fewer of our students, particularly at like the non-elite schools, are going to go into traditional journalism careers. And believe me, I want them all to be in those careers if I could, but I would rather have the ones that are going into more persuasive communication. Like, I'd rather have them really understand what they're doing and have like a solid sense of like just news values and ethics, so
right.
that then they can do some things that, okay, it's not journalism, but it's still a lot better than maybe some of the stuff that we've seen in the past, from persuasive communicators. And then maybe they'll also, like, side benefit is maybe they'll actually be better news consumers and will demand better journal. I just think there's a win. Like, in the bigger picture, there's more wins you can get by trying to pull those folks into a little bit more of a news content kind of paradigm than
Right.
just shoving them away and saying like, well, you're totally a different thing than me. Don't ever come talk to me. I mean, it just doesn't. That just
Well,
doesn't make any sense anymore to me.
and even when I was a journalist, I always thought the best PR people to me were the ones who had been journalists, because they tended to be most reliable with their content. They tended to know what was expected in terms of quality,
Mm-hmm.
and so you got good information. You didn't and the people I liked the most in public relations that I dealt with were the people that I just knew were shooting me straight, and I realized they had to represent their client and they had to represent their institution, but they would do it in such a way that was ethical and responsible. It wasn't
Yeah.
that, and I knew sometimes they couldn't tell me everything, but at least when they did provide me with information, it was accurate. It wasn't data that had been skewed or something.
Yeah.
It was providing me in a good picture.
Mhm. Yeah. No, that's a really important piece of this too. So yeah.
Well, you want
Cool.
to end our episode here? So this is the inaugural episode of the Lean Newsroom.
Nice.
Right.
Yeah,
So
I guess so. Unless you got anything else you want to say, Gross.
no, I don't have it. So we can do this. What you want to shoot for doing this, like kind of every week, 2 weeks, somewhere around there?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay, we'll
Yeah.
shoot for doing this. It'll be about half an hour, and we'll advertise it a little bit more. And we can shoot. Is Friday a good day?
Yeah, actually, Fridays I rarely have any things specific scheduled. So yeah.
Okay. Well, let's say goodbye to our 0 viewers, and we'll be back next week. We'll shoot for doing it next week.